we need to in 20 minutes learn this whole third part of the Sichot, which is the sweetening part. And we're on page 196, in chapter 6 of the Sichot. And here he's going to talk about Zachor. So he says, let's just say quickly the first part. He says that we met Amalek 4 times in history. Once when we came out of Egypt. First you have to divide Jewish history, he says, into 2 parts. Before the entrance into the land of Israel and after. So before the entrance to the land of Israel is only 40 years really, when they came out of Egypt until they came into the land. And then the rest of the time is one long attempt to, shall we say, become civilized in the land. Okay. So in these 40 years they met Amalek twice. Once when they came out of Egypt, that's the famous war that we're always remembering. But then, at the end of the 40 years, before they came into Eretz Yisrael, Amalek attacked again. But this time they concealed themselves. They said they were Canaanites. And the Jewish people didn't know who they were, so they just davened that whomever is attacking us, we should be able to vanquish them. And then in the years since then, since they came into the land of Israel, so again there were 2 encounters with Amalek. The first one he says in the time of Shaul, that's again the one that we read in the Haftarah. Even though there were other encounters, but there were more like skirmishes. They weren't like real attacks. So that was with King Saul. And he says at the end of times, the Mashiach will fight the final war with Amalek. That's not an encounter with Amalek. It's one man. It's not Amalek. Amalek's like a people. That's how he understands it. It's like a force in the world. One man, obviously he came from that. So that maybe it's like the exception that explains the rule. Here's the exception that one person who did this and this, Haman, and imagine with the whole people how dangerous they were. Okay. In any case, he says like this, at page 197, second paragraph from the bottom, on the right side. אנו רואים שבא בשעה שבמלחמה שבראשית התקופה הראשונה הופיע עמלק בצורה גלויה, הרי בסיומה של תקופה זו הופיע בצורה מוסווית בדמות של כנעני. So we said that at the beginning of the 40 years they came openly. They were Amalek. Everybody knew who they were. But at the end of the 40 years in the wilderness, they came concealed. They showed themselves to be Canaanites and not Amalekites. מכאן אנו לומדים שכך הוא הדבר בשתי המלחמות שבתקופה השנייה. So if we draw a parallel, it should be the same way in the years after they came into the land of Israel. So that the first time, אם במלחמה שבראשית תקופה זו לאחר כיבוש הארץ מדי 7 אומות הופיע עמלק בצורה גלויה. The first time when Saul fought against them, they were clearly who they were. הרי שבמלחמה שבסיום תקופה זו בדור מלך המשיח בדורנו הופעתו היא בצורה מוסווית ובלבוש אחר. At the end of this period, meaning now in the time of Mashiach, then they will come concealed again, hiding their true identity. Okay, so that's the premise of the whole of what he's going to talk about. לגבי מלחמת עמלק בראשית התקופה הראשונה אמר אשר קרחה. המדרש מפרש את הביטוי במובן שקרירות מלחמתו של עמלק התבטאה רק בהחדרת כור רוחני ואדישות. So in the first war of the wilderness with Amalek, so the Medrash explains that what happened to you really means that he infused you with coldness towards God, indifference. בני ישראל היו אז בדרכם לקבלת התורה, רצונם היה להקדים את הכרזת נעשה לפני נשמע, הם מוכנים לקיים את אשר ידרשו, בין אם יבינו את הצורך בכך ובין אם לא יבינו. So he says the warmth that the Jewish people felt in that generation was that they were about to receive the Torah, and they knew that in order to receive the Torah, you had to be willing to accept whatever God said, even if you didn't understand the reasons for it. But Amalek came, מבקש לצנן את ההתלהבות, he wants to cool your excitement. הוא טוען, אין לי חלילה כוונה להפריע למתן תורה. He says, very interesting, the Rebbe here builds on this. He says, I don't want to intrude and to dissuade you or from receiving the Torah. On the contrary, we talked about this, that his lineage is Avram Yitzchak. It's the same in the beginning, but then it's Esav, and then he has his father was which one?
When he chased after Yaakov.
What's his name? He also escaped Elipaz. Yeah? So when you take Avram, Yitzchak, Esav, Elipaz, Amalek, you get, I think, 5 times Amalek. No. You get 5 times Avram, maybe. You get something good. 5 times something good. And then we said that there are 5 pillars of faith that Avram, Yitzchak, and Esav failed at. Avram, Yitzchak built it, and then Esav failed at it, and Eliphaz failed at it, and Amalek failed at his. That's a whole teaching for Purim. Remember from Purim? In any case, so he says he has a good lineage. So he doesn't say, I want you not to receive the Torah. אלא שלדעתי מיותרת ההתלהבות הפזיזה והיציאה מן הכלים. My only problem with it is you're too excited and you're not going to think straight and you're going to do things you're going to regret later. איך אתה רוצה לקבל לך עוד חוקים שאינך מכיר אותם? How can you take upon yourselves laws that you don't know beforehand what they're going to be? הרי משכיל אתה. He says to Yaakov, he says to the Jewish people, you're smart. פיקח אתה, you're wise, הרי אינך עומד לקבל תורה שהיא חוכמתכם ובינכם לעיני כל העמים, ואין האלה פיקח להתנהגות משולהבת ופזיזה של יציאה מן הכלים. It says you're going to receive a Torah that's going to become your wisdom and your understanding in the face of the nations. Because of this, people will say that you're wise. And it's not appropriate that you should receive it by jumping in and not even thinking about what you're doing. והתחשבות בגדרים והגבלות, and you're not taking into account all the limitations. Maybe I won't feel well, I won't be able to do this, and maybe this is too hard, and so on and so on and so forth. התחייבות שנעשה בלי לדעת במה המדובר, ואף בלי להבין אחר כך את טעם המצוות. How can you say I will do something when you don't understand what it is yet? עמלק טוען כך כי אין הוא מצאצאי יעקב אבינו. He says this because he's not a descendant of Yaakov. He's a descendant splits off to Esav. Yaakov היה איש תם יושב אוהלים. Yaakov was a whole man sitting in tents. Amalek מסכים להתנהגות של יושב אוהלים. He understands that you need to sit in tents. He understands the value of education. He even understands the value of sitting in בתי כנסת ומדרש והתעסקות בתורה. He understands that you should sit and learn Torah even. שכן הוא נצר לאברהם ויצחק, because he came from Abraham and Yitzchak. Those are his great-grandparents. אך אין הוא יכול להרשות התנהגות של איש תם תמימות, קיום המצוות בלי להבין את נימוקיהם, הקדמת נעשה לנשמע. But he can't accept these things like sincerity, earnestness, and accepting upon yourself the yoke of commandments even without understanding all their reasons. לדעתו של עמלק יש תחילה להכיר יפה את המשימה המוטלת. He says you first of all have to understand what's at hand, what you're being asked to do, להתעמק בנכונותה, to think about whether it's true or not true. ואחר כך לבחון אם אמנם האדם מסוגל לקיים אותה. And then to think about whether I can actually perform this task. ורק במידה שהשכל והאפשרות הנוחה מרשים, לקיים את המצוות. And only if the rational mind and my circumstances permit, then I should take upon myself the yoke of commandments. נשמע קודם לנעשה. You first have to hear, then you can do. גם עשיו יתנהג כך. That's how Esav behaved. It's how Esav behaved himself. He was a man who knew how to hunt, and then he went to hunt. First he knew what to do, then he went and did it. לפי דבריו של עמלק אין מה לחשוש מהתנהגות זו, שהרי התורה היא עניין של חומה ושכל, והקדמת הנשמע לא תפגע בקיום הנעשה, משום שהשכל יחייב את קיום המצוות. According to Amalek, there's nothing to fear by thinking first and then jumping next. You shouldn't jump first and then ask questions. Because the Torah is wise, and so the Torah wants you to act this way, he claims. באה מצוות עמלק, מלחמת עמלק ומחייתו, מזהירה התנהגות של אשר קרחה הקרירות, מביאה חלילה לקיום הפירוש האחר בביטוי זה, קרי, החיים והכוחות שניתנו מן השמיים לשם קיום התורות נעלות שכיבוש הארץ והפיכת העולם דירה לקדוש ברוך הוא נרתמים לשירות הגדלת כוחות הטומאה והקליפות רחמנא ליצלן. So he says, Amalek is the opposite of what we call being impetuous. Or being, what do you say when somebody's... No, there's another word. Spontaneous. Spontaneity can be a holy thing. That's what the Rebbe is saying. Very interesting. That the Amalek represents the killing of spontaneity. Like you have to be cool and calm all the time. No spontaneity. Nothing that you do just because you feel that right now that's the right thing and you don't know how to rationalize it and how to say why this is true. He says he kills that force. And he says you can't kill that force. He says that's the lie in it. You can't be completely unspontaneous. That doesn't exist. What happens? The spontaneity is used then for the negative forces in a person's life. And Shlomo Melech says something like this. I think he's referring to this. He says, Al titen lenashim zromtecha, or something like that. What does he mean? He says, you have a sexual energy. Says Shlomo, if you don't turn that power to politics, interesting. He says to politics, to running a state, and you turn it to the women instead, I guess it goes together. It's like one against the other. Then you will be sinning with women instead of making mistakes in statehood. He says the same thing. You have to be spontaneous at some level. He says real spontaneity, it sounds like it's open all the time. It's so strong. The spontaneity has to be in a person. The only question is, where are you going to use it? Are you going to use it for things that are holy and constructive and your best attempt at doing something good? Or are you going to use it to feed the negative forces in the world? But spontaneity is going to remain. And so he's basically saying Amalek is the power of spontaneity. He's telling us, be spontaneous only with things that are not holy. That's what he's saying. Because what the Jewish people felt when they were about to receive the Torah, he's saying, is a feeling of bren, of fire. That's the excitement that goes into spontaneity. A person is suddenly excited about something and runs and does it. He says that's how they felt about the Torah. So what did he do? He said, don't do that. Because he knows full well that if you don't expend spontaneity in the right place, it'll come out in the wrong place. A person cannot be unspontaneous. It doesn't exist. We all do things on a whim. The only question is, what are you going to do on a whim?
What are you going to do?
On a whim. I think it's an amazing analysis, right? So he's the same force that made Adam eat from the tree of knowledge. It was also spontaneous. It was on a whim. It wasn't because he thought about it. By Chava, you can say she was persuaded. But what was it? Because he wanted this connection.
She persuaded him.
No, she didn't persuade him. She just gave it to him. She just gave it to him and he ate. Why? So we could say the same argument. Because he wanted to be close to her. She's giving you something. It's a big deal, by the way. I just read from someone last night. He read to me. He said, one of the biggest secrets in life is to know how to take. And people don't know how to take from each other. They're not willing to seem weak. Because when you take from someone, especially from your spouse or somebody who's close to you actually, then right away you want to give back. Oh, if you guys invited me over, I have to invite you back. I'm not saying that you shouldn't. You should. But it's a feeling of reciprocity. There should be a feeling of, I also want to invite them. Not because they invited me. He says people don't know how, it's an art in of itself to know how to be weak, as it were, to receive something from someone. So you want to show that you're a good person, so you right away you reciprocate. It's a problem in and of itself. The Amalek always represents this attempt to do away with spontaneity, and knowing that if you try to do away with spontaneity by not being spontaneous about holy things, then eventually the spontaneity will come out and it will feed the negative. This is a tremendous thing. And then he says, החיים והכוחות שניתנו מן השם לשם קיום מטרות נעלות שכיבוש הארץ והפיכת העולם לדירה לקדוש ברוך הוא. He says you need spontaneity in order to transform the world. You need spontaneity to fight the war to conquer the land of Israel. And here he says conquer in quotes, because it doesn't mean necessarily physical war. He's talking about convincing the world. And the Rebbe famously didn't think that war was the right, that the physical conquest was the way to go. He said you can defend yourself, that's something else. But to conquer, not going to help. He was very realistic about it. He said if you conquer things, nobody will recognize it. Because that's not the purpose of the Jewish people, to be strong and mighty. They have to be strong and mighty in their spontaneity of holiness. That's where he saw that the land of Israel would be conquered, by convincing people of holiness, by explaining the Torah. So instead of doing that, everything will be churned, your spontaneity will be churned into the Tumah and the Klipos. This is a natural product, a natural consequence of being cold and indifferent. מישהו מתיימר להיות יודע ציד, הופך בסופו של דבר לאיש שדה, בורח מועלי תורה שבכתב ושבעל פה. A person who, like Esav, feigns to be, not religious, but this guy, knowing how to hunt, meaning he knows he's not spontaneous, he has no brand to it, no excitement. He ends up being an ish sadeh, a man of the field, and he doesn't learn. Then he runs away from learning. He runs away from the Torah. חובה להתנהג בדרכו של יעקב איש תם. דרך התמימות היא הדרך הישרה שעליה נאמר בתומת כפי שנדרש בגמרא, ועל החושבים להקדים את הנשמע ומתנגדים להתנהגות נלהבת נאמר וסלף בוגדים תשדם. It says that the way earnest means that you're a tamim. That's really what it means. Earnestness is the translation of tamim. And what it does is that you're able to, in your earnestness, to just simply take upon yourself things. And I always like to mention in this respect, to read the story of the simpleton and the wise man from Reb Nachman, who really shows how it is that a person who was simple, earnest, became the viceroy of a kingdom, and the wise man ended up in a pit of dirt or mud and stuck in doing nothing with his life. Because this earnestness means that whatever he's asked to do, he does simply. He doesn't try to do all the cheshbonos in the world. Yeah. Okay, so that was the main part of it. The end of it is that, like a lot of times, the Rebbe goes into what?
Why don't we finish it next week?
No, I want to move on. There's Purim here, because we have Purim for next week. That's definitely something we should do. Then we have a little bit of Tav. But just to say the end of it, that he conceals himself in the final war. Meaning, the Rebbe says that you have to know that the way Amalek is today, it's not what you think it is. You're looking at these evil, you're looking for these evil, arch enemies of the Jewish people. He says that's not the problem. Those we always have to go through. There's always people that will try to destroy the Jewish people. That's not Amalek. That is Amalek, but that's not the point. He was called a Canaanite because a Canaanite is a soicher. It's a merchant. So the second time that he came to make war in Moshe Rabbeinu's generation, he came as a merchant. He says that's how that's how he comes today. He convinces you that the purpose of life is to gain more material wealth. That the purpose of life should be to focus on the material. And that's a Malik today. Don't look for some, evil guy with a crooked mouth and a sinister laugh and all these things, and he's out to get you. He's much more subtle than that. And he comes and he's concealed as this interest in the material world, how the material world is what's important, and not the spiritual world, and not the learning of Torah and doing of mitzvahs. And he convinces you, and this is amazing, he says here clearly, he convinces you that the most important thing to say is, my strength and my prowess gave me all this wealth. What? Yeah. And that attitude, instead of giving all that I have, all the credit for what I have to Hashem, says that is a Malik. He's hiding in that. And he's telling you that that's the antidote to that is the feeling of bittul to Hashem. That everything that I did, Hashem did. I didn't do any of this. All the credit belongs to Hashem. I'm what the Gemara calls Mesayah she'en bo mamash. It's like somebody's moving a heavy load on Shabbos, and he tells me, okay, just put your hand on me, even though I'm not lifting anything. That's the example in the Gemara. I didn't do it. I'm just a placeholder. That's all I am. Whatever happened around me, happened around me. I love this Latin saying now, which I can't say yet, but it goes something hac, ergo proctor hac. What it means is something happened after something else, therefore we think it happened because of that something else. We talked about this. This is like David Hume's criticism of causality. That because two things are they're proximal, they're in proximity, they follow one another in time or in space sometimes. So we have this tendency to think that one caused the other. Says that's not how it is. So you see yourself and you see what you've achieved, and you say, "Oh, because of me, I've achieved this." And he says, "No, this is a completely false connection. There's no connection between the two. The real truth is that Hashem organized it in such a way that you would be here, and the wealth would be right next to you, so you could access it. And you didn't make it." Hashem, this Sichot. So Shabbat Zachor Sameach.
Amen. Bezrat Hashem.
And we'll learn on Sunday, Bezrat Hashem.
Bezrat Hashem.
Shabbos.